All right, good morning, everyone. So far, you guys should have hopefully turned in your homework. And yes, I did just realize I spelled homework wrong here. It's okay. But make sure you guys turn that in for me. Our goal for today is that you guys are going to continue to work with decimals because Chapter 3 is all about working with rational numbers, specifically working with fractions. But before we do that, it's important for us to know that you remember how to multiply and divide with our decimals as well. So that's what our goal is today. All right, the first one we're going to take a look at is we're going to look at how do we multiply our decimals. Multiplying decimals actually isn't that bad, but I'll tell you the biggest mistake students make is this very first step that you're going to put into your notes. You need to line up the numbers. With this problem, we're going to actually pretend that the decimal points aren't even there, and we're going to multiply like normal, like the decimal points weren't there. We're going to worry about that at the end. So the first thing is we're lining up the numbers, and when we line them up on the right-hand side. Then you're going to multiply as normal, just like you've always done before. Hopefully, you guys were taught last year to multiply the same way that I am. It's my experience from last year that you did, so you didn't learn a different way of doing it. So multiply totally as normal. Then after you have your final answer, that's when you're going to do this final step. And if you can find another way to shorten it into your notes, that's even better. I tried to be very specific and concise, and this is what I came up with. So you want to count how many numbers are behind the decimal point in the problem. So you're going to look at the very original problem. How many numbers were after the decimal point? Your answer, which is called the product, needs the same number of decimal places too. So we're going to count to make sure we place the decimal point so there are 4 digits after our decimal point in our answer. So let's go ahead and take a look at this one. Again, our first step is to line up the numbers. So I'm going to write the first number, and when I write my second number, I'm going to put the 6, so it's lined up again on the right-hand side, and my 7. You'll notice that my digits are lined up, but the decimal points are not. That's okay. We worry about that at the very end. So to refresh your memory with multiplying, what we're going to do is we're going to take this 6 and we're going to multiply it by each number in that top number. So we're going to first do 6 times 4. 6 times 4 is 24. Put down the 4, carry the 2. Now we're going to do 6 times 3, which is 18, plus 2, which is 20. Put down the 0, carry the 2. 6 times 7 is 42. Add the 2 that we carried, so you end up with 44. So this is what we get when we take 6 times each of the numbers in the top. Some students will forget this next step. Remember, when we move over to the 7, we have to put in a placeholder here, because really it's like we're taking 70 times 4. So we're going to do 7 times 4, which is 28. Putting my 8, putting a new 2 there. 7 times 3 is 21, plus 2 is 23. Carry the 2. 7 times 7 is 49, plus 2 is 51. Once you have these, now you add the 2 together. 4, 8, 7, 5, and 5. A lot of students will stop here, but they will forget, oh yeah, they have to place the decimal point in their answer. So if I look back in the original problem, there are 1, 2, 3 numbers after our decimal point. So in my answer, I have to have that same thing. So I'm going to start at the end and go 1, 2, 3, and my decimal point goes between the 5 and the 7. So my answer is going to be 55.784. I'm trying to make that an obvious decimal point. Because on your homework, same thing. If I have to guess where your decimal point is, I'm going to mark it wrong because it's not clear to me. So make sure your decimal point is visible enough in your answer so I know where it's located at. Let's take a look at some more examples for this one here. So we're going to take 21.5, whatever the first number is, just write that one as normal. The second number, make sure you line up the digits. This one, it just so happens the decimal points line up, but it's because both numbers go to the tenths place. But we still have to remember in this one where our decimal point goes. This problem, students will always put the decimal point in the wrong spot. So be careful on this one. Let's multiply. 9 times 5 is 45. Use your multiplication chart if you need it. That's why I gave you guys one at the start of the school year. 9 times 1 is 9, plus 4 is 13. Put the 3, carry the 1. 9 times 2 is 18, plus 1 is 19. As we move to our next number that we're going to multiply, again, you always put in a 0 for a placeholder and continue to multiply. 4 times 5 is 20. Carry that 2. 4 times 1 is 4, plus 2 is 6. 4 times 2 is 8. And you'll notice when I moved to that second digit to multiply with, I crossed off those numbers that I carried earlier, so that way I didn't get confused as far as, do I have to add those or don't I? So when you're done with them, cross them off so you don't get confused. Now we add the two together. 5, 3, 15. 8 plus 1 is 10. Now again, on this one, so often students put the decimal point in the wrong place because you have to ask yourself, how many numbers are after the decimal point in the problem? There are 2 numbers, so in our answer, we also need 2 numbers. And again, you always work from the end of the number and move in. So this is 105.35. And again, make that decimal point visible to me. Let's look at another one. So this one, again, write that first number and that second number, work from the back. Let's multiply. 4 times 5 is 20. Put the 0, carry the 2. 4 times 1 is 4, plus 2 is 6. 4 times 2 is 8. 4 times 0 is 0. Now, what you could do is you could then go through and multiply 0 times everything up here. But hopefully you know 0 times anything is 0. So once you get to where it's just a 0 here, you can actually place your decimal point in your answer. So I look, there are 1, 2, 3, 4 numbers after the decimal point in the problem. I need 4 after the decimal point in our answer. So it comes at the very beginning, it comes before that 0. So I'm going to show you 2 ways that you can write your answer. Actually, I can show you a couple. 1, as long as I can see your decimal point, you can write it just like this. A lot of my students are more comfortable, and I think it's probably what you're taught in 6th grade, is that you should always put a 0 in front of the decimal point. That's perfectly fine as well. Some of you guys might also remember that if there's a 0 at the end, you actually don't have to write it. So your answer could actually be written any of these ways. Most of the time I'll have students write it one of these 2 ways. Does not matter. Okay? It's all on what kind of you're used to and what you're comfortable with, but as long as the decimal point's in the right spot, that's perfectly fine with me. Alright, I would like you guys to try C and D. Once most students are done, go ahead and press play with the video. I'll have them worked out. You can see if you come up with the same answer. Help each other out if students are struggling with it. And then when you're ready, we'll move on to division. All right, on example C. On this one again, how the problem ended up setting up, the decimal points ended up lined up, but notice in the answer, it's in a different spot. So when you multiply and put the decimal point in the answer, you can write it in one of these two ways. 0.3108, or if you don't put that 0 at the front, just 0.3108 is perfectly fine as well. I'll be honest, in a problem like this, minor mistakes students might make are multiplication errors. Don't be afraid to use that multiplication chart. That's why I'm giving it to you guys. Use it, because I know students don't always have their multiplication facts memorized correctly. And I don't want that to get you to make mistakes or cause you to make mistakes on these. So don't be afraid to use it. On example D, this one here, lining up 9.1 and 51, multiplying. This one, there's only one digit after the decimal point. So in our answer, there's only one digit after the decimal point. So we end up with 464.1. All right, let's take a look at dividing decimals. Everyone's favorite. It's actually not that bad. And I'm not going to give you ones that when you divide, they go super long into the decimals. I'm making them short and sweet because I just want to know, do you know the process? One of the biggest things that students struggle with is on this first step. They don't know which number goes where. There are names for them. I'm not expecting you to know the names. What I tell my students is, remember, the first number is going to go inside our house. The second is going to go outside the house. Now, once we have that set up, we're going to be looking to start with it just that outside number. That's called the divisor. If that number is a decimal, and most of the problems, all the problems we'll see in class, and I think all of them in your homework as well, will have a decimal. If that's the case, we have to move the decimal point to make it be a whole number. So we're going to move it to the end of our number. But because we're changing the divisor, we have to do the same thing to what's called the dividend, which is inside the house, to make sure that we keep our problem equal. That is the same original problem that we had. So if you move it on the outside, move the decimal point in the dividend, your inside number, the same number of places. Once you do that, place the decimal point in our answer, and you're going to do long division just like what you've always done prior to using decimals. So the only thing on this one is to make sure you're moving that decimal point. So let's take a look at our example. So let's go ahead and make our little house. Always leave room at the top because, again, your answer is going to be written here. First number goes inside. Second number goes outside. So that's step 1. Step 2 says if our divisor, our outside number, is a decimal, which, if we look, this number is a decimal. So that means we have to move the decimal point to the end of the number. So I'm going to go 1, 2. Because we did it on that, I have to do the same thing with the inside number. Moving it not to the end of the number, but moving it the same number of places. So we hopped twice here, so we have to hop twice here. You hop or move the same number of places in both parts of the problem. Then you place the decimal in that same spot. Now let's divide. This number, because those zeros are just in front of it, is really just 4. So we're going to ask ourselves, does 4 go into 0? And hopefully you're saying no. So I teach my students to put a little X there, so that way they end up putting digits in the right spot in our answer. Does 4 go into this 0? Nope. We're going to put a little X there. Does 4 go into 8? Yes, it does. It goes in twice. So then we multiply. 2 times 4 is 8. And then we subtract. 8 minus 8 is 0. Even though there's a 0 here, there's still a number we have to bring down from our dividend. So now we ask ourselves, how many times does 4 go into 6? Doesn't go in equally, but it goes in at least one time. 1 times 4 is 4. And we subtract. Remember, with decimals, there's no such thing as a remainder. We keep dividing. So because we still have a number here after we subtracted, we have to put in another 0 and bring that one down. How many times does 4 go into 20? 5 times. 5 times 4 is 20. And then this is exciting because when we subtract, we get 0. And there are no more digits here. This means we are done. 2.5 is our answer. For the problems that I'm giving you guys, I'm fairly confident I don't have the answer key to the homework handy for me. But I know when you're dividing 2 or 3 decimal points. If you find that you're going 4, 5, 6 decimal points for your answer, you did something wrong. For mine, when you're dividing, they're not going to go that long. Because I want, again, for you just to know, for you to tell me, do you know the process? So we're doing some short and sweet ones. All right, let's take a look at example A then. Setting this one up to start with. Again, the number that's first goes inside. And the number that's second goes outside. I think about this to help you guys remember it. I always call the kind of this division sign here, I call it the house, as you've heard me say. This first number, they were first in line. They get to go in the house, but it's only a one-person house, so they're the only people that fit in it. So the 4.2, because that comes second, has to hang outside the house. If it helps you remember it, awesome. If not, try to find something else. All right, before we divide, we have to move a decimal point because 4.2 has a decimal. Moving it to the end of that number. If we move it there one time, you have to move it one time in the inside of the house. Then you place it in your answer. And again, same thing with like we did with multiplication. Make sure I can see that decimal point. All right, now this part gets a little tricky, only because it's bigger numbers. So we're going to ask ourselves, does 42 go into 1? And hopefully you're going to say, no, it doesn't. So putting a little X there. Does 42 go into 13? Hopefully you're saying, nope, that doesn't work. Now we want to know, does 42 go into 130? 130 is for sure bigger than 42, so it goes in there. Now it's a guess and check of how many times 42 goes into 130. So you might have to do some work on the side here to figure out what works. So let's see here. I'm going to use some of my estimation skills. And I'm going to think, okay, 42 is close to 40. So I'm going to think 40, 80, 120. That's close to 130. Let's see what 42 times 3 is. So I'm going to do a little work down here and see how close to 130 we get. 3 times 2 is 6. 3 times 4 is 12. Oh, that's really close to 130. But we didn't go over. It's kind of like the Price is Right. You have to get really close, but you can't go over to win the prize. That's really close. So we're going to put our 3 here. 3 times 42, we already did that, is 126. Subtracting, I can't take 0 minus 6, so make that a 10. And that 3 becomes a 2. 10 minus 6 is 4. 2 minus 2 is 0. 1 minus 1 is 4. Good way to check. After you subtract, this number has to be less than this number. If not, you didn't find the biggest number that could go here. So 4 is clearly smaller than 42. So we still don't have 0, and we have other digits. Bring down that 2. Oh, does 42 go into 42? Goes in 1 time. 1 times 42 is 42. Subtract, and we get 0. And we end up with 0. There are no other numbers here, so our answer is 3.1. Let's look at our next one. Same thing here. There's my little house. First number gets to go inside. Second number goes outside. Of course, we're dealing with decimals, so we have to look to see, do we need to move? We sure do. Move 2 spots on the outside, so move 2 spots on the inside. Placing our decimal point. Okay, asking ourselves, does 135 go into 0? Does not. Does 135 go into 1? Does not. Does 135 go into 14, I'm sorry. 135 into 14? No. And since this is right in front of our decimal point, we're actually going to put a 0 there. Okay, it's just a placeholder. Now we're going to figure out, does 135 go into 148? And hopefully you're saying, it does. And hopefully you're thinking, those two numbers are kind of close. Looks like it's only going to go 1 time. Subtracting. 3, 13. This number is less than 135. Fantastic. Like to see that? Bring down this 5. 135 goes into 135 1 time. And we subtract and get 0. We end up with 0. There are no other digits. There's our answer. So again, you'll notice when we're dividing, the problems I've given you to the tenths place, to the hundredths place, they're not going to be long decimals when you're dividing. Multiplying, on the other hand, they could be. When you're dividing, they will not be. All right, I want you guys to go ahead and try these two. Again, I will work them out. When you're done, press play in the movie again and see if you come up with the same answer. Help each other out as people have questions. All right, taking a look at these two. On the first one, we had to move the decimal point 1 place outside of the number. So we had to move 1 place inside the house. This would end up being pretty nice for dividing because 8 goes into 16 2 times. Subtract and you get 0. But again, you can't stop here because you do have another digit to bring down. And 8 goes into 8 1 time, and when you subtract, you get 0. And I rewrote my answer down here because it was a little messy up there. So you end up with 2.1 or 2 1/10. Moving to example D, same thing, had to move it 1 time. So you do 1 time inside the house. This one was probably a little bit tricky. You had to probably do some guess and check on the side for some multiplication. 23 doesn't go into 1, doesn't go into 19, but it goes into 193. And it goes in 8 times. 8 times 23 is 184. Subtracting, you end up with 9. Bring down the 2. 23 goes into 92 4 times. 4 times 23 is 92, and you end up with 0. No more numbers to bring down, so here's your answer. All right, any remaining time that you guys have is to work on this homework assignment. It is on page P13. Remember we talked about on Friday last week. This is in the beginning of the book, so it's before you even get to chapter 1. If you look at the pages, there is a section that has P and then some numbers. So make sure you find P13, and you're now doing 13 through 24. Obviously, again, show your work like I told you guys to do on Friday. There is no way you guys are able to do these in your head. I've been doing these for a super long time. I still can't do them in my head. There's no way that you guys can't. That you can do it in your head. So I do need to see some work from you guys. Also, just a quick reminder, it's a little ways out yet, but the Chapter 2 end date is November 2nd. So if that test that we did last week didn't go so well and you want to retake it, make sure you make arrangements with me to make test corrections and to retake that test by November 2nd. And if you're missing anything or you want to redo anything from Chapter 2, make sure it's in by that date as well. Otherwise, the rest of the time is yours to work, and I will see you tomorrow, and hopefully we get to celebrate a Packer win.